This is the image they told us the permanent naval corridor would prevent, not a probe, not a harassment run, not the kind of asymmetric low-grade pressure operation the IRGC has been conducting since its strategic command was destroyed 12 days ago and its hypersonic tests rattled every missile defense planner from Huntsville to Tel Aviv. What the world is watching right now on satellite feeds, on the tactical composites being processed at CENTCOM's forward headquarters, on the screens of the energy trading desks in Singapore and London that have been pricing this conflict in real time for 23 days, is a coordinated, multi-domain, operationally sophisticated Iranian attack on the permanent naval corridor itself. Not on a commercial vessel, not on a regional base, but on the specific military architecture the United States Navy established 9 days ago and declared the definitive resolution of this conflict's maritime dimension. It is Wednesday, May 7th, 2025, 8:31 in the morning, Gulf Standard Time, day 23 of this conflict. The first commercial supertanker transit was completed 5 days ago. The Meridian gas crew was released 4 days ago in what the State Department described as a breakthrough, and the foreign policy community celebrated as the beginning of a diplomatic endgame. Oil had fallen to $171 per barrel. The G7 leaders had begun drafting a joint communique declaring the crisis substantially resolved. And now, at 8:31 a.m., all of it, the corridor, the relief, the communique draft, the $171 oil is suspended in the specific vertigo-inducing moment of a crisis that was supposed to be over, announcing with considerable force that it is not. Something just happened in the Strait of Hormuz. It is escalating fast. And what it tells us about the durability of military victories, the limits of permanent commitments, and the nature of adversaries who have decided that resistance outlasts any single defeat is the analysis that every American watching this broadcast deserves to hear plainly and in full. Buckle up. The corridor is under attack. The end game was a mirage, and the Republic is being asked on day 23 to answer a question it has not yet learned how to answer. How does a democracy end a war against an adversary that does not recognize the ending? To understand what is happening at 8:31 a.m. in operational terms and why the specific nature of the attack on the corridor represents something more strategically alarming than its immediate tactical consequences would suggest, you have to understand the distinction between an attack on a military position and an attack on a strategic concept, and why Iran at 8:31 a.m. is conducting the latter rather than the former. Here's what you need to understand. The permanent naval corridor is not primarily a physical arrangement of ships in a waterway. It is a strategic argument, a physical demonstration of the proposition that American military power, consistently applied, can maintain freedom of navigation in the Persian Gulf against the will of a determined regional adversary. Every commercial transit under escort strengthens the argument. Every day the corridor operates without incident adds to its credibility. Every statement by an allied government acknowledging the corridor's effectiveness adds to the political capital that sustains its funding. The attack this morning is not designed to destroy the corridor's ships, though Iranian planners would accept that outcome gratefully. It is designed to attack the argument, to demonstrate in real time to every commercial shipping company, every maritime insurer, every allied government currently reconsidering its previously expressed reservations about the American military operation, that the argument is not September 11, 2001, as market participants price in the possibility that the corridor's commercial operation has been suspended by the attack, and that the 5 days of relative normality since the first transit were an aberration rather than a trend. And we are talking about the G7 communique draft, which the French delegation's lead negotiator reportedly texted to his foreign minister at 8:47 a.m. with a single word, wait. The decision architecture facing the theater commander at 8:31 a.m. is the most compressed and least forgiving of any in the 23-day conflict, because the attack's three-element design has specifically engineered the time pressure that compresses American decision-making toward the pre-delegated response options rather than deliberative consideration of alternatives. The autonomous drone swarm requires immediate engagement, and the phalanx CIWS systems on the corridor. And destroyers are firing, the ship-based helicopters are being armed for anti-surface operations, and the A-10s are being scrambled from Al Dhafra. But the 22-drone swarm is larger than any previous autonomous surface attack, and the engagement geometry is complicated by the Milius's degraded combat systems and the Hormuz pioneers' navigation loss. The shore-based missile batteries require suppression. FA-18s from the Abraham Lincoln are being vectored toward the target coordinates, but the newly emplaced batteries are in civilian fishing infrastructure on the Iranian coastline, and the rules of engagement governing strikes on targets co-located with civilian infrastructure require a legal review that takes minutes the tactical picture does not provide. The GPS jamming requires either electronic countermeasures available immediately or a strike on the Abu Musa underground electronic warfare facility, which requires penetrating munitions, coordination with the strike package already managing the missile battery suppression, and a specific authorization for a return to the Abu Musa target that the previous strikes after action review designated as a separate targeting decision. 3 simultaneous tactical problems, 3 different authorization chains, 1 theater commander, and approximately 11 minutes before. The Hormuz Pioneer's navigation loss creates a collision risk with the Pacific Sovereign's wreck. This is the operational architecture of a sophisticated adversary that has studied American command decision processes for 30 years and designed an attack specifically to exceed their simultaneous processing capacity. It gets worse in the dimension that connects this morning's attack to the fundamental strategic question the conflict has never definitively answered: the question of whether the Islamic Republic's commitment to resistance is a military posture that can be degraded to the point of behavioral change or a civilizational identity that military degradation only hardens. The Meridian gas cruise released 4 days ago was interpreted inside the administration and by most outside analysts as the signal that Iran's civilian diplomatic establishment had reasserted control over the crisis and was navigating toward a face-saving exit from a military confrontation it had comprehensively lost by every conventional metric. The 8:31 a.m. attack suggests that interpretation was, at minimum, incomplete. The attack's operational sophistication, the autonomous surface drones, the concealed missile batteries, the surviving electronic warfare infrastructure on Abu Musa required planning, logistics, and preparation that could not have been initiated after the Meridian gas release decision. It was initiated before that release, in parallel with the diplomatic signal by elements of the IRGC, operating on a timeline and with objectives that the Foreign Ministry's diplomatic track either did not know about or chose not to disclose through the Oman Channel. Iran is not a unitary actor. It never has been. The Foreign Ministry and the IRGC have operated on divergent strategies throughout this conflict, and this morning's attack is the most vivid possible demonstration that the IRGC's strategy, continue the resistance, adapt to defeats, deny the corridor's permanence, has not been abandoned because a civilian ministry secured the release of 23 hostages. The Republic has spent 23 days dealing with the Iran it wanted to confront. This morning, it is confronting the Iran that actually exists. The historical parallel that illuminates 8:31 a.m. with the most analytical precision is not drawn from Middle Eastern conflict history, but from the American experience in Vietnam, specifically the Tet Offensive of January 30th, 1968. The Tet Offensive was, by every military metric, an American and South Vietnamese tactical victory. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces who attacked 100 South Vietnamese cities simultaneously were repelled with catastrophic losses. Their operational capability degraded for years. It was simultaneously a decisive strategic defeat for the American position because it demonstrated incontrovertibly that the Johnson administration's public narrative of a war that was being won, that was approaching its endpoint, that had passed its peak of adversary capability was false. The Tet Offensive did not win the war for North Vietnam. It won the argument. It demonstrated that the adversary's strategic commitment to resistance outlasted the American public's tolerance for the cost of maintaining the military position. The 8:31 a.m. attack on the permanent naval corridor is not the Tet Offensive in scale. It is the Tet Offensive in logic. It attacks not the military position, but the narrative that the military position had resolved the conflict. It arrives at the moment when the narrative was most vulnerable. 5 days of commercial transits, a released hostage crew, a G7 communique draft oil at $171, and it detonates that narrative in the most public and unmistakable way available. Whether it produces the same political consequence that Tet produced in 1968 depends on Whether the American political system in 2025 responds to a contested corridor the way the American political system in 968 responded to a contested strategic narrative, the evidence of 23 days suggests the systems are under a palpable strain. Consider the specific constitutional and institutional dimension that the 8:31 a.m. attack creates for the congressional authorization that has been the formal legal framework of American military operations since day 3. The war authorization passed 20 days ago with a margin 287 to 148 in the House that reflected genuine bipartisan support in the immediate aftermath of the Al Udeid missile attack that killed 9 American service members. That margin has been narrowing with each passing week, each successive appropriations debate, and each piece of news that contradicted the administration's periodic characterizations of the conflict's trajectory. The Meridian gas release, the first commercial transit, and the oil prices fall to $171 had produced the first genuine political breathing room the administration has experienced since day 1. The 8:31 a.m. attack eliminates that breathing room entirely. The 48 House members who voted against the original authorization and the additional members who have been publicly questioning the supplemental appropriations request will now face a political environment in which the conflict's cost, financial, military, and strategic, is again rising rather than falling. Sources on the Hill speaking to Politico on background described the calls arriving in congressional offices this morning as a different category of constituent pressure than anything we've seen since the first week. Not the patriotic rally around the flag pressure of the Al Udeid aftermath, but the exhausted, skeptical, economically frustrated pressure of a constituency that was told the war was winding down and has just watched oil spike $18 in 41 minutes. The Republic's political architecture is not designed for open-ended military commitments sustained through repeated crisis cycles. It was explicitly designed to prevent them. The founders' insistence on congressional war authorization was not procedural formalism. It was the specific institutional mechanism by which democratic societies impose cost discipline on military adventurism. That mechanism is now being tested in its most demanding possible configuration. What the Republic confronts at 8:31 a.m. on May 7, 2025, is the question that has defined every American military commitment since Korea, and that every administration since Truman has answered with a version of the same formulation. We will maintain the commitment as long as necessary to achieve our objectives. The commitment is the corridor. The objective is permanent freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. The cost is $3 to $4 billion per month in direct operating expenses. The continuous exposure of American naval personnel to an adversary that has demonstrated it will adapt rather than capitulate, and the political capital of a democratic government managing an open-ended military engagement in a region that has consumed the political capital of 3 previous administrations. George Kennan, writing in 946 in the long telegram that became the intellectual foundation of American Cold War strategy, argued that the Soviet Union's commitment to the expansion of communist influence was not a military problem to be resolved by a military solution. It was a political and civilizational problem to be managed through sustained containment, the patient, long-term application of counterpressure that did not seek decisive military victory because decisive military victory was not achievable at acceptable cost. Kennan was right about the Soviet Union. The Cold War ended not with a military defeat of the Soviet state, but with the exhaustion of the Soviet system's internal capacity to sustain its own commitments. Whether a Kennan-style containment strategy, patient, sustained, accepting of incomplete victory, is applicable to the Islamic Republic of Iran, and whether the American political system of 2025 has the institutional patience that containment requires, is the question that the 8:31 a.m. attack has placed on the Republic's table, with the force of an autonomous surface drone and the precision of a shore-based missile battery that no one knew existed. The corridor is holding, the Milius is damaged but afloat, the A-10s are inbound, the attack will be repelled. The question is not whether it will be repelled. The question is what the Republic decides to do with the knowledge that repelling it is not the same as ending the need to repel the next one. Watch these 5 indicators in the next 6 hours, because they will determine with the highest available precision which of 2 trajectories the conflict's 24th day follows. Watch the Milius's damage control report. If the flooding is contained and the destroyer remains operational in degraded mode, the corridor's physical integrity is maintained, and the attack can be characterized as a costly failure. If the flooding cannot be controlled and the Milius requires emergency tow to Bahrain, Iran has achieved the first visible damage to the corridor's escort formation that its strategic communication requires to sustain the resistance narrative. Watch the Hormuz Pioneer's navigation restoration. If the GPS jamming is countered and the supertanker completes its second transit under escort, the corridor's commercial operation survives the attack and insurance market confidence is preserved. If the Pioneer is diverted, the commercial operation is suspended for a second time, and Lloyd's war risk underwriters have the incident they have been using to justify maintaining their coverage suspension. Watch the strike authorization on the newly identified missile batteries, how long it takes the rules of engagement review to clear the engagement of targets co-located with civilian fishing infrastructure will tell you how much the administration's legal architecture has tightened since the early days of the conflict, and whether tightening has made the corridor militarily sustainable or operationally vulnerable to adversaries who place weapons in civilian environments deliberately. Watch the congressional reaction in the first 3 hours of the Washington business day. If committee chairmen call for briefings rather than hearings, the Hill is processing the attack within the framework of the existing authorization. If they call for hearings, the authorization's political sustainability is being actively reassessed. And watch Tehran's silence or its communication. If Iran says nothing about the attack through any official channel, the IRGC is acting without foreign ministry awareness, which means the diplomatic track and the military track have fully diverged, and the ceasefire framework the Oman Channel has been constructing is built on assumptions that no longer describe the actual Iranian decision-making structure, and the corridor is under attack. And the endgame, that wasn't an endgame, has produced a new beginning that no one planned for. The Republic's answer to what that new beginning requires will be the most consequential strategic judgment it has made in 23 days of consequential strategic judgments. Subscribe, stay with us. The answer is being formed right now in the same compressed, imperfect, irreversible way that every answer in this conflict has been formed. And it will matter long after the crisis it addresses has been given a name in the history books.